told the German Chancellor,
"The military position can scarcely be worse than it is."
Hindenburg's lieutenant, Ludendorff, predicted gloomily that if one of the Allies did not collapse, the defeat of Germany was inevitable. The probability of the Allies breaking through in the West had worried Ludendorff ever since the Somme. All through the winter, he had been building an immensely strong system of fortifications in depth, running from Arras in the north to Soissons in the south. The Hindenburg Line, as the Allies called it, overlapped the sector which Nivelle was proposing to attack. It was not yet finished in February 1917, but under pressure from local British attacks in the north of the salient, and with expectation of the French offensive, Ludendorff ordered a withdrawal to the new line, in some places 30 miles behind the original front.
The decision to retreat was not reached without a painful struggle. It implied a confession of weakness that was bound to raise the morale of the enemy and lower our own.
One night we were not shelled, and we wondered what had happened. And then we heard that the old Hun, as we called him, was pulling out. He pulled out his heavy howitzers. He'd gone. And then we saw the cavalry come up. The Bengal lancers trotted past. It was a wonderful sight. Rumours all round, news that was he going? Was he packing up altogether? Bit by bit we followed. Our patrols went out. They did very good rearguard action, delayed our advance. And at last we got onto green fields and roads that weren't shelled. Almost virgin country. And we could gallop on the downs, we could see the hares and see the larks. And after the months and months of utter brownness and chaos and everything going back into ruin, to see that open country again was marvelous.
The German withdrawal was accompanied by an orgy of calculated destruction. Bridges were blown, roads mined, whole tracts of countryside flooded, fruit trees in full bloom senselessly felled, wells poisoned, household objects booby-trapped.
Whole villages had been torn down by hand, evidently at the cost of immense labor. It was as if the whole countryside had fallen into the hands of demons, who had vented their lust for destruction on these humble dwellings. As the people grasped the fact that the Germans had really gone, they crowded round us, tears of joy and gratitude running down their cheeks. Many just wanted to touch us, to make sure that we were real. The thing that was hardest to bear was the inquiries, the piteous questions about relatives and friends. Their questions evoked unbearably a vision of wooden crosses, hundreds of thousands of little wooden crosses, scattered all the way from Switzerland to the North Sea.
The Allied advance towards the Hindenburg Line was painfully slow. The weather was atrocious, and the troops, accustomed to static trench warfare, moved, as one observer put it, like an army of moles suddenly ordered to disport themselves in the light of day. In France, as indeed in Britain, the German retreat was hailed as a great victory, and Nivelle claimed the laurels.
Had I been able to command the German armies, I couldn't have given them orders more favorable to my plan.
Haig, whose army was to attack at Arras in support of Nivelle's offensive, took a different view.
The advisability of launching Nivelle's battle at all grows daily less. The enemy has organized the area in the rear of the threatened front to enable his troops to slip away. His object seems to be to disorganize our offensive by causing our attacks to be made in the air.
Nivelle himself obstinately refused to admit that the German withdrawal had altered anything.
I don't fear numbers. The greater the numbers, the greater the victory.
He was like a man under a spell, wrote a British liaison officer. the German defenses were obliterated in his imagination, and he could see himself galloping in the open country beyond. Grave doubts now beset Nivelle's own generals, Pétain, Franchet d'Espéré, Michelet. Their misgivings were shared by the politicians, by Painlevé, the new Minister of War, and Ribot, the Prime Minister. But the politicians did not dare dismiss the commander-in-chief on the very eve of a great offensive. Already the British bombardment at Arras had begun. Among the men of Haig's armies, hopes ran high. They had a premonition that this time all would go well. On the eve of the attack, a trench raiding party was sent over to discover how effective the bombardment had proved. It reported that the 1st and 2nd German lines were not recognizable as trenches. German prisoners spoke of a symphony of hell, a symphony which had shattered every pane of glass in Douai, 15 miles behind their lines. They knew that the Canadians were about to try to retake Vimy Ridge. "You Canadians may reach the top of it," said one prisoner, "but those that do could be taken back to Canada in a rowing boat." On the dawn of Easter Monday, April the 9th, the gunfire suddenly stopped. Then,
the British guns broke out again into such a fire as had yet been seen on no battlefield on earth. It was the first hour of the Somme repeated, but 100-fold more awful. As our men went over the parapet, the heaven above them was a canopy of shrieking steel.
as the barrage passed, the Germans on Vimy Ridge saw khaki figures in flat steel helmets swarming in every direction. These were the Canadians attacking one of the strongest positions on the Western Front.
We had to thread our way amongst the shell holes because the ridge itself had been so pounded. It was nothing but a mass of shell holes. The German trenches were almost obliterated. There were just mere ditches that were left. We carried on there. The first objection was the German main line. From then on, we went on to the final objection, which was just over the eastern crest of the ridge. When we reached the top of the ridge, a remarkable sight was unfolded. We saw before our eyes all the German-occupied villages around Lens, the mining villages, with the slag heaps and mine shafts. And you could even see beyond Lens. They didn't seem to have been affected at all. They still seemed to be intact.
This was the promised land, and the Canadians were the first Allied soldiers to see it since those far-off days of 1915, when the French had held part of